All right, welcome back to another session on the Accenture KIPP Collaboration Summer Professional Development Summer Series. My name is Sydney, and I am a full-time management consultant at Accenture based out of the San Francisco office. I am also a former KIPP LA alumni, so I'm super excited to be speaking with you all today. Thanks so much for tuning in. In this session, we will talk about tips for getting your resume in the best shape possible, followed by best practices and preparation tips for job or internship interviews. So without further ado, let's get started and talk about the resume. So let's first talk about the basics. What is a resume? Resumes are nothing but a summary of your selected professional experience in the context of where you want to go next. Selected professional experience is really key to keep in mind here because oftentimes you'll notice when constructing our resumes, we tend to really panic and list out everything that we have done. But please remember that they are not meant to be a comprehensive list of your every single activity or accomplishment. So overall, your resume serves as a marketing tool to really get you to an interview, the next step in the job application process. And, the resume is usually the first step in the job application process. It is the document that you will submit in nearly every job portal application, and also the one pager you will hand to job recruiters in person. So it's really important that you utilize your resume to convey to the recruiter and resume reviewer that you are indeed qualified for a particular job. So key takeaway I would emphasize here is that a resume is a catered document, and also it should be slightly different based on the job you are applying to, which we will talk a little bit more about in the next couple of slides. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Let's talk a little bit about the basics. Now, every resume should include information about your education and relevant professional experience. Many other sections may also be added depending on your field and experience level. These other sections might include, summary of qualifications, any honors and awards, extracurricular and community activities, certifications, professional memberships, languages, hard and soft skills, etc. But again, keeping up with the theme of catered and selective, make sure to choose categories which really showcase your strengths in relation to the job that you are applying to. If you do choose to include multiple sections on your resume, make sure to organize the contents of your resume by highlighting whatever category of information is the most important. And keep in mind, within each category, give information in reverse chronological order. So you would list the most recent experience first and then go back in time from there. In general, whatever is most relevant merits the most space. That's another thing to keep in mind. Something else, brief note on formatting. Remember to always use standard size font. Anything from size 10 to 14 points is fine. If you find that you are running a little bit out of space, you might want to go to size 10, but nothing smaller than that. Also, try to keep the design simple, utilize white space, avoid colorful templates, graphics, and any other unprofessional fonts. And to the right here, you will see an example of a really sleek and elegant well-formatted resume. And this is the type of look you should aim for as you construct yours. Let's now take a deep dive into the anatomy and main parts of the resume, starting with the contact information or header section, which I have highlighted here in purple. Your name, your address, telephone, and email should always come first as a part of the header of a resume. Now, of course, make sure you only list phone numbers which you are sure will be answered professionally. And always make sure your voice message is professional in the case a recruiter decides to give you a call. So that covers the contact information or header section. In the education section, start with your present or most recent degree program and move backwards in reverse chronological order. Now, generally, the rule of thumb is if you've graduated from college or are about to graduate, you can remove your high school or any secondary school information. There's no need to take up space or crowd up your resume with that additional information. And for each school that you have listed, include the name of the institution or college and expected or awarded date of your degree in the order of month first, followed by year. It's also appropriate in this section to list relevant courses under each degree, as these can serve as great keywords that help the reader understand the specific knowledge and skill you can bring to the job, right? So as an example, if you are applying for a customer service role, you might include a public speaking course you took. Another example, if you are applying for a data analyst position, you might include relevant coursework in statistics, math, maybe a course you took on a programming language like R, Python, etc. Now, when it comes to GPA, it can get a little tricky and situational. If you personally feel that you have a really strong GPA, it would work in your favor to include that. However, if you believe it might not make an initial strong impression, you might not have the strongest GPA, I would advise to leave your GPA out. Now, alternatively, some students feel that they are a stronger performer, stronger academically in the program of study or major, and so they would choose to only include their major GPA. And you should be able to get in contact with your counselors at your university to access your major GPA to include that information should you choose to disclose that. So that concludes the education section. Let's now talk about one of the most important sections of your resume, the work and professional experience section. In this section, you should include everything you've done that's relevant, whether you did it as an employee, as an intern, as a volunteer, member of a student research team, officer of an organization, etc. Right? You want to be able to describe each experience to give an overview of what you did with an emphasis on what you were able to accomplish in the position. Now, in order to achieve that effect, make sure to use verb phrases and remember to make every word count. Try to be as concise as possible, right? It's easy to ramble in this section, so try to be meaningful and effective with your words. Try to also avoid helping verbs such as assisted, worked with, helped, responsible for, right? These are all common verbs we all try to use once in our resume, right? Instead, use the specific strong action verb that reflects the part of the project that you worked on at the job or internship. So, if you ever find yourself stuck, you can always do a quick Google search and of example action verbs for inspiration. If you continue to get stuck drafting bullet points for this section, just try to ask yourself some of these questions, right? What skills did you use? Did you use any specific software programs at your internship or job experience? What were your accomplishments? Try to ask yourself these questions to get the juices flowing, and wherever possible, try to add quantifiable details to provide context and demonstrate positive impact on the project you were working on or at the job you worked. All right, so that's the work experience section. Now, the next most common section after work experience is the campus engagement or leadership section. And just like in college applications, right, employers are often really interested in what you do besides work. So this might include volunteer work with charity organizations, student groups, alumni associations, or any civic political groups, right? Usually you don't really need a super detailed description of these activities, but you do really want to show and emphasize transferable skills. So you can describe any relevant accomplishments of your volunteer effort, right? So as an example, I coordinated 12 volunteers in a fundraising effort that resulted in $53,000 in donations. That would be an example of a description you would include. It's quantifiable, it's strong, it demonstrates what you contributed. Now, another note, important note, is that if you find that you lack formal work experience, right? Especially if you're younger, you don't have a ton of internship experience. This is another section to really emphasize those transferable skills from community engagement and campus extracurriculars. So you really want to try to leverage this section if you don't have a lot of work experience. All right, the last but not least, we are at the skill section. This final section is usually in the form of a really simple specific list, right? The skills that you choose to showcase here should really only include objective, measurable skills. Examples would be proficiency with a language, computer programs, perhaps specific laboratory procedures you learned in a biology class or a chemistry class, any programming languages, etc. So they're very hard objective skills. Any other soft skills, right, like communication, teamwork, perhaps specific industry knowledge, leadership, those soft skills should really be illustrated in the above sections that we just talked about rather than stated in this section. So those should be demonstrated through the descriptions of your experiences, whether in campus engagement or your prior work experiences. So that's the skills section. And that concludes the main parts of putting together a resume. So you put together a really successful resume and you've now been invited to participate in an interview. Now what? Well, the good news is that when an employer invites you to an interview, chances are they generally already think you may be qualified to do the job, right? So that's great news. And this interview opportunity is the time for both yourself and the employer to exchange enough information to allow you both to determine whether you and the organization or company are a good fit for each other, right? So it's sort of a mutual process there. So, think of an interview as a really highly focused professional conversation and try to use the limited amount of time you have there to learn about the employer's needs and also discuss the ways that you can contribute to their company, right? So again, emphasizing the mutual element of the interview process. Now, with this context in mind, let's start talking about how to best prepare for a job interview, starting with what to do before the interview. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. All right, before the interview. Now, an important component of any pre-interview preparation is performing some background research on the organization and company. Any background research you can do prior to an interview will really help you to be able to show why your background and expertise makes you a good fit for that particular position you're interviewing for. So, spend some time on Google reviewing the company's websites, familiarize yourself with their company divisions, mission statements, history, etc. Also try to learn about the industry, right? What are the most important trends in this industry, in this field, and how is the economy affecting the industry at the moment? These are all important contexts to get right before your interview and will also leave a lasting impression on your interviewer, right? It shows that you've done your research and you're really knowledgeable. But again, you're not expected to be an expert in the particular field, right? But you should have enough knowledge to formulate meaningful questions to present to the interviewer at the end of your interview, or perhaps weave in some of these research elements in your answers during the interview. And thinking about your experiences from the employer's perspectives will really help you be able to talk confidently about them and show that you can really tie in your previous expertise to your future work effectiveness and productivity. You know, last note before we conclude this slide is preparation is really vital, right? Doing this research is really vital. While you can't anticipate every question, right, you can prepare yourself to make the most of whatever you are asked. It is critical to know as much as you can, both about the company, position, and industry, but also do lots of self-analysis so that you can best articulate your skills and experiences. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section where we talk about what to do during the interview. So the bulk of interview questions come in the form of behavioral interview questions, where the interviewer or recruiter will ask questions about your past performance and project experience. And usually behavioral questions tend to start with a, tell me about a time when, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That's usually how you can identify whether a interview question is behavioral or not. Now, obviously, there are an infinite amount of questions employers could bring up. So the best place to really start your preparation is to first determine which skills and qualifications matter the most for the position you applied for. So you can do a little bit of research again. You can go back to the job description and highlight keywords that describe the position requirements to really refresh your memory. And once you have put together that list, think back to specific situations, whether it be in a club, school club you're involved with, an extracurricular you're involved with in your past job, where you have clearly demonstrated those skills or character traits and attitudes. And try to really have these stories in the back of your mind ready to deploy, to talk about in an interview. And in case you ever get flustered or nervous, you at least have these scenarios prepared in your mind, right? So to save yourself. So before heading into an interview, I recommend that you have at least 3 scenarios prepared in your head and really try to know the details of these experiences in and out. And the goal is to be able to adapt these stories according to the behavioral questions you get asked during the interview. And as you go through that exercise, as you think about these scenarios you want to talk about, and as you develop these examples for your behavior-based interview, use the STAR technique to provide specific situations. So I've listed out what STAR is here. S stands for situation. So in situation, you would explain the context for your story. Who was involved? How did the situation begin, right? Introduce the situation to the employer and really set the context for them. T is task, where you would describe the problem you were tasked with solving, right? You can also talk about the expectations and challenges that were a part of this task. A stands for action. You would explain what you did and how you did it, how you took on that task. So outline the steps you took to resolve the issue or carried out the project, etc. What specific actions did you take? R stands for results, right? And with the results of your efforts, talk about accomplishments, rewards, impacts, right? Share the outcome. What was the result of your work? And you can even include some lessons learned depending on the situation, right? So this is a very easy go-to guide to organize your answers, and the more specific you are, the better, right? Keep in mind also that as you develop these scenarios, sometimes employers might check your responses. So again, make sure to share accurate information that's verifiable in the case that your employer decides, your recruiter decides to contact your past employers to verify the information that you've shared. So that's during the interview. These are sample behavioral questions that you can expect. They are including of, but not limited to, these following examples. So what is the most complicated project you have worked on? Did you have any trouble with people in your team during this project? What kind of people do you have trouble interacting with? How do you deal with difficult clients? Again, the classic, tell me about a time when, right? Tell me about a time in your life when you've demonstrated leadership or had a significant impact. Tell me about a time in your life when you've had to influence a peer or superior to do something that they don't initially believe in, right? These are all example behavioral questions that you can begin to think about as you formulate these scenarios in your head, as you prepare these scenarios to take to your interview. More often than not, interview questions will look like this in another shape or form. So these are a good starting point. All right, let's talk about questions to ask your interviewers. Almost always, your interview will end by your interviewer asking you if you have any questions for them. And these questions, more often than not, are also being evaluated, right? So not just the behavioral questions, but they're also going to evaluate the questions you ask. And because of that, you should always have questions prepared. Be responsive to what has gone on in the interview, right? Pay attention during the interview. And if you have listened well, you should also be able to come up with really thoughtful questions, which impress the interviewer. Just as a way to prepare, you might want to prepare a few questions in advance. But, an insightful comment based on your conversation can also make an even stronger statement. So it's really up to you, but these are some starting points of questions you can consider asking, right? So what attracted you to this company? What qualities and skills are most valued at your company? What characteristics must one have to thrive at this organization? Some specific questions about the company would be, what are the company's growth projections? Whom do you identify as your major competitors? These all show that you have done your research in the industry, in the company, and you're interested, you're very invested in the company, right? And that would leave a really lasting impression on the interviewer. All right, well, that wraps up our session on resume and interview readiness, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in, and don't forget to reach out to your KIPP through college counselors for help and any additional guidance in any of the topics that we've discussed today. Thank you again so much for your time.